as part of the Football Daily. You're listening to BBC Radio 5 Live. The Prime Minister is about to address the nation. Sarah Brett will guide you through it.
Good evening. This is Sarah Brett, and for the next half hour we'll be bringing you the latest developments on coronavirus. There now follows a ministerial broadcast from the Prime Minister.
Good evening. The coronavirus is the biggest threat this country has faced for decades, and this country is not alone. All over the world we're seeing the devastating impact of this invisible killer. And so tonight I want to update you on the latest steps we're taking to fight the disease and what you can do to help. And I want to begin by reminding you why the UK has been taking the approach that we have. Without a huge national effort to halt the growth of this virus, there will come a moment when no health service in the world could possibly cope, because there won't be enough ventilators, enough intensive care beds, enough doctors and nurses. And as we've seen elsewhere in other countries that also have fantastic healthcare systems, that is the moment of real danger. To put it simply, if too many people become seriously unwell at one time, the NHS will be unable to handle it, meaning more people are likely to die, not just from coronavirus, but from other illnesses as well. So it's vital to slow the spread of the disease, because that is the way we reduce the number of people needing hospital treatment at any one time, so we can protect the NHS's ability to cope and save more lives. And that's why we've been asking people to stay at home during this pandemic. And though huge numbers are complying, and I thank you all, the time has now come for us all to do more. From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home, because the critical thing we must do to stop the disease spreading between households. That is why people will only be allowed to leave their home for the following very limited purposes. Shopping for basic necessities as infrequently as possible. One form of exercise a day, for example, a run, walk or cycle, alone or with members of your household. Any medical need to provide care or to help a vulnerable person, and travelling to and from work, but only where this is absolutely necessary and cannot be done from home. That's all. These are the only reasons you should leave your home. You should not be meeting friends. If your friends ask you to meet, you should say no. You should not be meeting family members who do not live in your home. You should not be going shopping except for essentials like food and medicine. And you should do this as little as you can. And use food delivery services where you can. If you don't follow the rules, the police will have the powers to enforce them, including through fines and dispersing gatherings. To ensure compliance with the government's instruction to stay at home, we will immediately close all shops selling non-essential goods, including clothing and electronic stores, and other premises, including libraries, playgrounds and outdoor gyms and places of worship. We'll stop all gatherings of more than 2 people in public, excluding people you live with. And we'll stop all social events, including weddings, baptisms and other ceremonies, but excluding funerals. Parks will remain open for exercise, but gatherings will be dispersed. No Prime Minister wants to enact measures like this. I know the damage that this disruption is doing and will do to people's lives, to their businesses and to their jobs. And that's why we've produced a huge and unprecedented programme of support both for workers and for business. And I can assure you that we will keep these restrictions under constant review. We will look again in 3 weeks and relax them if the evidence shows we are able to. But at present, there are just no easy options. The way ahead is hard, and it is still true that many lives will, sadly, be lost. And yet it is also true that there is a clear way through. Day by day, we are strengthening our amazing NHS with 7,500 former clinicians now coming back to the service. With the time you buy by simply staying at home, we are increasing our stocks of equipment. We are accelerating our search for treatments. We're pioneering work on a vaccine. And we are buying millions of testing kits that will enable us to turn the tide on this invisible killer. I want to thank everyone who is working flat out to beat the virus. Everyone from the supermarket staff to the transport workers to the carers to the nurses and doctors on the front line. But in this fight, we can be in no doubt that each and every one of us is directly enlisted. Each and every one of us is now obliged to join together to halt the spread of this disease, to protect our NHS and to save many, many thousands of lives. And I know that as they have in the past, so many times, the people of this country will rise to that challenge and we will come through it stronger than ever. We will beat the coronavirus and we will beat it together. And therefore, I urge you at this moment of national emergency to stay at home, protect our NHS and save lives. Thank you.
The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. Well, let's speak to our political correspondent, Jonathan Blake. Hi, Jonathan.
Hi.
Stay at home. What were the other main points?
Well, that was a stark and sobering statement from the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, after days of concern that the government's measures, while strict in terms of advice, were not having the required effect. The government has gone about as far as it can tonight in imposing further measures which will affect people across the United Kingdom in a big way. To recap, the main measures that the Prime Minister has announced, which will come into force tonight, are that people should only be allowed to leave their homes for these 4 reasons. Shopping for basic necessities, and as the Prime Minister said, as infrequently as possible. Exercising once a day, and that's alone or only with members of your household. Any medical need, including providing care to a vulnerable person, or travelling to and from work only when it's absolutely necessary and you can't work from home. So those are the restrictions on how often and for what reason we should be leaving our homes. But there are also further measures to enforce these and make sure that people follow them. So, as the Prime Minister said, all shops selling non-essential goods will be closed, as well as playgrounds, outdoor gyms, churches and other places of worship and libraries. They'll all be closed. The police will have the power to disperse gatherings of more than 2 people in public, excluding people you live with. And there will be an end to all social events, including weddings, baptisms and other ceremonies, but funerals, the Prime Minister said, will go ahead. They are draconian measures and they are at the upper end of expectations of what we were waiting to hear from the Prime Minister about this evening, and they represent a significant step change in the government's approach to slowing the spread of coronavirus.
Thanks, Jonathan. Our political correspondent, Jonathan Blake. You're listening to a BBC News special. I'm Sarah Brett. Let's speak to our health correspondent, Nick Triggle. Nick, before we talk about what the Prime Minister said this evening, remind us what has brought us to this point and what the latest figures are in the UK.
Well, in terms of the latest figures, it was announced today that there were now 300 deaths from coronavirus. The number of positive cases had risen to over 6,500. That's up by about 1,000 in a single day. Coronavirus has been spreading across the country. Those positive confirmed cases are just the tip of the iceberg. In the wider community, they estimate there's between 10 to 20 times as many cases. And the concern, as it has always been, is how the NHS will cope. And that's why over the last week we've seen drastically stronger measures gradually introduced. And I think what prompted today was the scenes we saw over the weekend. The sunny weather was out and people were gathering in quite large numbers in parks and open spaces. And the government wants to maximise its opportunity now to curb the spread and allow the NHS to cope.
And as ever, Nick, there'll be particular concern about what happens to the most vulnerable people in our society. What should they be doing? What help is in place for them?
Well, there's detailed guidance coming out from GPs and the NHS to the 1.5 million people who are deemed at the very highest risk. And now these are people who might have had organ transplants, undergoing chemotherapy, suffering from certain cancers. They are being told to be shielded, to have no contact with people. But of course, carers who come and support them will be allowed to provide that care. Everyone else is strongly advised to reduce that social contact, really to work from home unless it's absolutely necessary, as the Prime Minister stressed today. And the reason for all this is that they suspect this virus for every infected person will pass it on to 2.5 people. And over the course of a month, that could lead to 400 new infections. Now, if we just reduce half our contact with people, that rate of transmission drops from 2.5 to 1.25. Now, that may not seem a lot, but over the course of a month, that limits the number of new infections to under 20 rather than over 400. So that it's so important and has such a big impact if we do reduce our social contact. And that's why we're seeing the measures that are being introduced tonight.
And in terms of the NHS and the preparedness, what is the latest that we know about that, given that Boris Johnson's been saying tonight that without a huge national effort to halt the growth of the virus, there will come a point where no health service in the world could possibly cope?
Yes, that has been the concern. I think what happened in Italy, where we saw particularly the hospitals in northern Italy swamped with patients, has of course worried government and senior NHS leaders. Now, they've been using the few weeks since we saw those scenes to really try and create some headroom in the NHS, by stopping all routine operations. That's happening from mid-April, although I understand hospitals have already started doing this. And that's going to free up about 30,000 of the 100,000 hospital beds. We're also getting new ventilators in. A deal was done over the weekend with the private sector to get another 1,200 ventilators. We have about 4,000 intensive care beds already. There's other sources we're going to, old and new stocks. The Ministry of Defence has a stock of ventilators that the NHS is looking to use. So we're beginning to see the rise in cases. The pressure in the NHS isn't that extreme at the moment, and there's work going on to create that capacity so we can cope with the surge I think we're going to see in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Nick, thanks. Good to talk to you. Our health correspondent, Nick Triggle. Dr. Anna Colton is with us now, the psychologist. Anna, thanks very much for being on the programme. Things have been stressful enough for people. People are being asked to make really quite major changes to how they live their lives as of tonight.
They are indeed, yes. And those changes not only will have a lifestyle impact, but of course a significant mental health impact in a number of different ways. Anxiety is already really high and will probably increase.
Could I ask you just to hold for me for a moment, because
Sure.
the Scottish First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, is about to speak. We're going to hear from the First Minister now.
Received updated advice from our scientists and our chief medical officers. The outcome of the meeting is being confirmed tonight across all 4 nations, and the Prime Minister, of course, has just made a television address. I wanted to take the opportunity to set out clearly and unequivocally what this means for Scotland. Some of what I'm about to outline has already been advised in Scotland, either yesterday or today, but I want to ensure that the latest position is set out clearly and comprehensively so that you, the public, know exactly what is now being expected of you. Let me be blunt. The stringent restrictions on our normal day-to-day lives that I'm about to set out are difficult and they are unprecedented. They amount effectively to what has been described as a lockdown. I know how difficult all of that is, and I am not going to seek to sugarcoat it in any way. But these measures are essential for the protection of all of us. Coronavirus is the biggest challenge of our lifetimes, and the measures we take to tackle it must reflect the magnitude of that. These measures are essential to slow down the spread of this virus. They are essential to reduce the peak impact of it. They are essential to prevent our National Health Service being overwhelmed so that it can continue to provide treatment to all of those who need it. And they are, quite bluntly, essential to save lives. So I ask you not to think that any of this is being done lightly. It is absolutely not. This is for the protection of each and every one of us. So what I am telling people across Scotland that they now must do to help us fight this virus is stay at home. That is the clear message I gave yesterday, and I am reinforcing that message now. From tonight, the only permissible reasons to leave your home are as follows. Firstly, to shop for basic necessities, and I'm asking that you should limit that to once a day. Second, to take exercise, again, once a day, but to do so alone or with your own household, not in groups. Third, for medical reasons or to care for a vulnerable person. And fourthly, to travel to essential work if that work cannot be done at home. As I said earlier today, we will be issuing further guidance to employers to help them judge what is and is not essential. And of course, support is in place for businesses and their employees, and more, I hope, will be put in place for those who are self-employed. But apart from those restricted reasons, the advice is clear, it is strong and it is firm. You must stay at home. To support this and to help ensure compliance, the following will now be required. Firstly, as I said earlier, all non-essential shops and retail outlets are being required to close. Libraries, communal places within parks and places of worship, with the exceptions of funerals, which I'll come back to in a moment, must close too.
And that is the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, speaking from St Andrew's House in Edinburgh, essentially repeating what the Prime Minister Boris Johnson had to say a little bit earlier. Stay at home, only go out to shop for basic necessities, one form of exercise a day, and only leave for to help somebody who is vulnerable or for any medical need you might have, and indeed travelling to and from work. Let's go back to Dr. Anna Colton, who's a psychologist. Anna, we were just talking about that it's a stressful time, but then when you are required absolutely now to stay at home, what kind of pressures that will put on families?
Absolutely. Excuse me. Anxiety is increasing every day, and with the increased numbers of cases and the increased deaths, people are becoming more anxious. But of course, we're not used in society right now to living with our family 24 hours a day and fundamentally not being able to see our friends. It's the social isolation that we see in this situation that is causing so many difficulties: increased anxiety, increased conflicts in the home, low mood, withdrawal, and social isolation, just because that's what we're being required to do. And it's a huge mental health challenge right now.
What's your basic advice for people? What's one thing that almost all of us could manage to do?
Put in a phone call or a FaceTime chat or some kind of communication with a friend or a loved one every day without fail. And if you don't want to because your mood is low, you really, really must do it irrespective. It's the one thing that is going to make you feel that little bit better.
And if there are tensions within the house, what's the best way for you to try and diffuse that?
Ideally, if you can just remove yourself from the situation, go and sit somewhere separate to the rest of your family or to the person that you're in conflict with. Remove yourself, walk away, try not to engage. You want to lower the temperature in the room. It's not easy. It's really not easy. And you know, all of us, when we get angry, tend to want to continue and win or make sure our point has been heard. But that will only serve to fuel the conflict and raise the temperature. And what you need to do in those situations, especially when you can't go out, is to lower the temperature. So remove yourself from the situation if at all possible. If you need to go and put headphones on to listen to music, absolutely fine. If you need to go to a bedroom, absolutely fine. Take yourself away.
Yeah, it's the advice I always give my 5-year-old. Walk away. don't get involved, and now I'm going to have to take it myself.
It's hard, isn't it?
It's harder than it looks. It's easier to say,
so much
isn't
harder.
it?
Yeah. Sure.
And to brighten our spirits, what can we do?
To brighten our spirits. Find things you really enjoy. Actually, the simple pleasures, one of the nice things about this is hopefully we can reconnect with those simple pleasures. If you enjoy reading, if you enjoy board games or cards, even if it's patience on your own, playing patience with cards, or, put in more than one FaceTime call or more than one phone call with people you enjoy hanging out with. We are so lucky that although this is tough, we are so lucky it's happening when we are so connected to our friends and our families. We can talk to anyone. We can see them on a screen. It is a gift. Use it and make the most of it. Play music, dance. I find that, dancing to music is a real mood enhancer. It really is. And if you've got hobbies, do them, if at all possible.
How important is structure? Because starting trying to navigate the nightmare that may well turn out to be homeschooling for me, I'm wondering whether or not routine and structure are vital. What's your advice?
Vital,
right.
Absolutely fundamental. Get up in the morning, get dressed. It's so tempting to be in pajamas all day, but actually you start to feel more and more miserable. There feels like there's even less purpose, even less to get up for. Try and keep your meals at a regular time. It sounds silly, but it really will help the body and the brain function and continue to function as they were. Once you start to mess up your body clock by sleeping later and going to bed later, actually there's a really big knock-on effect to mood and to productivity. So routine is really key, and particularly if you've got young kids need routine. They thrive on routine. They feel very discombobulated when it's taken away. So keeping that routine in is absolutely fundamental.
Thanks. Very good to talk to you, Anna. Best of luck.
Thanks a lot. Okay,
Dr. Anna Colton, who is a psychologist. Let's have a chat now with John Ashworth, who is the Shadow Health Secretary for the Labour Party. Good evening.
Good evening.
What's your reaction to the Prime Minister's announcement?
Well, these are extraordinary measures, aren't they? But there are measures that we were effectively calling for earlier today. We've all been watching the increasing numbers of deaths, sadly, because of this virus in the country. And at the same time, we all saw the pictures of people enjoying themselves in the park, at the beach, or at bustling markets over the weekend. And it was clear that the public, either because they didn't want to, or perhaps because the messages from government were mixed and confusing, were not following the social distancing advice. So I think making that social distancing compulsory is the correct approach. It's something we've called for. It's what's happening in countries around the world. So we do welcome what the Prime Minister has said tonight.
Is there anything that you would have done differently if you had been the ones in charge?
Well, I mean, in some ways, and in fairness to the government, that is a difficult question, because we don't have access to all the science and the data and the epidemiology. But from the outside, it looks like the government should have made these decisions much earlier than they did. I think the government should be doing more to scale up testing in the community, because people need to know if they've had the virus or got the virus, particularly NHS staff. I mean, we're not testing NHS staff at the moment, even though they're on the front line battling this virus for us. And secondly, we've not been able to get the NHS staff the protective overalls, goggles, visors that they need. I mean, you wouldn't send an army into battle without the correct armoury. So there are things that we would have done differently. But look, this isn't a time for politics and point scoring and all that kind of stuff. The national effort to defeat this virus has to succeed, and in that respect, we are willing the Prime Minister on, because we need to defeat this virus.
And will you be willing on the emergency legislation that's going to have its final reading on Wednesday?
Yeah, well, I've been speaking on that today, actually, and although none of us came into politics to strip away people's freedoms in the way we have to, but I think people understand in the circumstances that we have to take these extraordinary actions. There are still things that we're calling on the government to resolve. I mean, if people are still not going to get an adequate level of sick pay at the moment, well, what about the self-employed? They need the support. They're not covered by the government's package, and the government tonight have said people must only travel to and from work, but it's not clear what types of work, who is a key worker and who isn't. So we've still got questions for government about ensuring that people have the financial and economic security they deserve for themselves and their loved ones.
OK, Labour's Jonathan Ashworth, thank you very much. The Shadow Health Secretary there. 5 minutes to 9 o'clock. Listening to that was Dr. Sarah Jarvis, who's a GP and Clinical Director of patientaccess.com. Sarah, thank you very much for being with us.
Pleasure.
How do you feel about what's changed in the messaging from government this evening?
It's going to have been a tough message to hear, but I have to say I'm absolutely delighted to hear it. What makes me really sad is that we had to have this, because I've been saying for weeks in the media regularly, every time the government says stay away from each other, I've been saying absolutely, let's all work from home, let's all socially distance. We should have stopped shaking hands weeks ago. We should have been working from home 2 or 3 weeks ago, but people were just not listening to the message. And to me, it was terrifying to see those pictures of people in queues a mile long to go up Snowdonia. If you are going somewhere and you realise everybody else is going there too, it is just so obvious to me that you turn round and you go back again. There were many places people could have gone, where there were no other people around, and yet they flocked to the same places. They put themselves and everybody else at risk. And really importantly, that 1.5 million people who are now being shielded, who are being forced to stay in their home and not even leave to go out for a walk. They are the most vulnerable in society, but there are going to be people who are essential workers who've got to have contact with them. We have all got to do our bit to ensure that those people who cannot go, who don't have any choice, who have to go out in order to keep our economy running, in order to keep our shops, essential shops going, and of course in order to keep the health service and the armed services and the police service and the ambulance service going, that they should be protected too.
Well, just as a reminder for those listening, there were essentially a list of do's and do nots, and the do's were shopping for basic necessities as infrequently as possible, one form of exercise a day, any medical need, and that included to provide care or to help a vulnerable person and travelling to and from work, but only when you can't do it from home. So that's a huge help, isn't it, or an indication for people that need to go and help a loved one?
Yes, it absolutely is. And there was no question in my mind that this had to be part of it. When that announcement came out 36 hours ago about the 1.5 million people, all those people at the very highest risk groups, so people who've had a transplant, people who are taking medication which will suppress their immune system, people who've got cancers who are taking chemotherapy and other treatments, those are the most vulnerable in our society. But of course, many of those are also very, very frail. And of course, people have to go in. We've had a case, a colleague of mine just recently has reported that a patient of hers was left alone and fell and fractured her neck of femur and has had to go into hospital, has no choice. She's got a broken hip as a result of having been left alone. Now, that wasn't, that's one of those things that happens, but clearly it would have happened regardless. It wasn't that she didn't have carers. But if we have people being left all on their own with no carers, then those sort of accidents are going to happen. So, of course, people who care must go in, but they must also be scrupulous about hygiene.
And Sarah, just finally, people will be worried about the practicalities of getting medication. What can you say to them?
So everybody, if they possibly can, should be signing up for online medication. We are absolutely determined there is enough medication to go around. We are determined that people are not going to stockpile. And that means that GPs and pharmacists who are doing an amazing job will be policing the supply of medication. So if you've always had 1 month at a time, you will not get more than 1 month at a time. If you're one of those vulnerable people and you aren't signed up for online prescriptions, you must sign up for them. Your practice will help you do it, or somebody else can sign up on your behalf. The NHS app, Patient Access, they have proxy, which means someone can sign on your behalf.
Sarah, thank you very much. It's good to speak to you. Dr. Sarah Jarvis, who is a GP and Clinical Director of patientaccess.com. Well, that's all pretty much from this BBC News special tonight, on a night where the Prime Minister Boris Johnson said he must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must now stay at home. Remember, you can keep up to date with the latest developments by going to bbc.co.uk news.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live. BBC News at 9 o'clock. This is Justine Greene. Boris Johnson has announced an immediate crackdown on people being able to leave their homes in an attempt to tackle the spread of coronavirus in the UK. The Prime Minister has instructed people to only go outside to buy basic necessities, exercise once a day if they have a medical need, or for travel for essential work. He's warned people not to leave their homes or they'll face consequences.
You should not be going shopping except for essentials like food and medicine. And you should do this as little as you can. And use food delivery services where you can. If you don't follow the rules, the police will have the powers to enforce them, including through fines and dispersing gatherings.
People won't be able to take part in any social gatherings such as weddings and baptisms, but funerals will still be held. Mr Johnson said COVID-19 was the biggest threat the country had faced for decades. He ended his address to the nation by urging people to do their part.
Each and every one of us is now obliged to join together to halt the spread of this disease, to protect our NHS and to save many, many thousands of lives. And I know that as they have in the past, so many times, the people of this country will rise to that challenge and we will come through it stronger than ever.
The measures will be reviewed in 3 weeks' time. The number of people with the virus who have died in the UK has risen to 335 after a further 46 deaths in England. The Foreign Office has told British tourists to return home while they still can. New guidance has warned they could become stranded. Police in Cambridgeshire have said they won't tolerate threatening behaviour towards ambulance staff. The force has called on people to listen when told to self-isolate after a paramedic reported being verbally abused for advising a household they needed to go into quarantine for 14 days. There have been more than 300,000 cases of the virus worldwide. The Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, said that the pandemic was gathering pace.
The pandemic is accelerating. It took 67 days from the first reported case to reach the first 100,000 cases. 11 days for the second 100,000 cases. And just 4 days for the third 100,000 cases.
The number of infections is rising in Europe, the United States and now Africa. But the figures in Italy, the worst affected country, appear to be improving for the second day running. The number of deaths and new cases recorded has fallen each day since Saturday. Almost 6,100 people have died in the country. BBC News, it's 9:03.